Okay, everyone, we're going to get started. So thanks so much for joining us. We have hopefully an interesting topic today, proving CTI value. It's not a very exciting topic. We're going to try to make it more interesting. We've also had, a little bit of fun with some of the slides. So hopefully that will make it a little bit more entertaining than your normal presentation on ROI. Um, Let me just run through a couple of the housekeeping items. So first of all, uh, introduce you to Feedly really quickly if you're not familiar with Feedly. So Feedly allows you to track emerging threats, contextualize what matters, and deliver that tailored intel in minutes. And we do this by first ingesting data from thousands of trusted TI sources. We do this continuously, so it's different than an LLM. It's only doing it on requests. We're doing it all the time. We put that into our threat graph, so we're enriching the data. We're pulling out the relationships that we see in each article, and then we're matching them up into the threat graph that allows you to have better understanding of the context of each item. So how a threat actor relates to a malware relates to an IOC, for instance. And then we try to provide analyst-led tools. So we do focus on the analyst. We believe that the analyst-led tools are going to be better for threat intelligence than autonomous type tools that put the analyst in the background. So we really try to put the analyst in the forefront, directing what the AI tools do and how you do it, and then limit the scope of what the AI does in each step, so that you have the ability to not only control it but also to verify all the output from it, because it's grounded in the sources that it's relying on. And then once you have that information, you can share it in tons of ways. It's everything's formatted in STIX 2.1, so you can see it through our API, shared into your TIP, your SIM, your SOAR, downloaded, into your OpenCTI, all that stuff. We also have an MCP server, so if you want to connect that into your Claude, for instance, you could use that as a way to, ask and have all that data grounded into in the data that Feedly has graded and collected. And then finally, we allow you to share, produce and share the intel that you're creating all the time with your stakeholders via report builder, automated newsletter. You can tag people in your Slack or your team. So lots of ways to share that information. So if you haven't tried Feedly already, please go out, check out Feedly Threat Intelligence, and sign up for a free trial. All right, enough of that. So I'm Sean Jakes, product marketer here at Feedly, hosting this. A little bit about my background before I introduce Dave. Before I was ever into the marketing side, I was a CPA and have an MBA in finance. So I do know a little bit about the topic of ROI and some of these metrics. So it's not just the marketing guy talking about finance metrics. It's a guy who was a former CPA that also did consulting and managed that kind of stuff. Dave, do you want to give us a quick intro on yourself?
Yeah, I'm Dave Johnson. I'm a product manager at Feedly. I was a former FBI analyst for about 7.5 years, and then I was in private sector, and I was a CTI manager and led our threat hunt team. And I have a lot of experience with dealing with the topic of today on both ends. So hopefully that's a little bit insightful as we get to it.
Awesome. Is one thing we like to do, just a quick introduction. We do a finish the sentence, and I hadn't even thought about this question until right at this moment. So Dave doesn't know what it is, and neither do I, but I'm about to come up with one off the top of my head.
You don't know what it is?
I don't. Okay, how about this? A recent technology purchase that I'm excited about is Dave.
Yeah, these headphones that I couldn't get to work today. So I
Awesome.
tried them right before this, and then it's the Arctis Nova Pros, and I like to game, so then I like to have one device that works between different systems. But yeah, I'm still figuring it out.
Mine is one of those giant TVs. So I
That's
finally
a that's a good
we
one.
we had a TV on the wall. It was, I thought, plenty big. But we decided to go for the even gianter TV. So it's 85 inches, which is like I can't even believe how big this thing is. We taped blue tape on the wall for like a week before we decided that we could handle that. And now that it's up, it's like, how come we never had this all the time? So it's pretty great. All right, one more. Okay, one of the things, one metric that let me, geez, I'm coming off the top of my head, not very quick here on my feet, but uh, a metric that is overrated that often gets used to make decisions, Dave.
Oh, that gets used to make decisions? I don't
Yeah.
know. I think the common metric is like throughput, like intelligence products produced, but they rarely lead to decisions being made. Actually, the decision that gets made, if that's your sole metric, is that you're probably not a viable CTI team, in my opinion, if that's your throughput metric.
I'll say one is IRR, internal rate of return. So a lot of times people will calculate a project, and they'll come up with like, what is the internal rate of return on that project? And a lot of times they'll compare it to something that isn't a really a good metric to compare it to. So they might say, oh, okay, we're getting, 20% return on this project. That's good. But what they don't really factor in is the weighted average cost of their capital, which is not just how much it costs to borrow debt, but also what is the cost of our equity. So you do a kind of a weighted average cost of that. It's kind of finance geeky stuff, but I'll just pass on any more of that. All right, let's jump in. Dave, you were gonna start us off, I think, right?
Yeah, sure. I'm just reeling from that explanation. But no, that's cool. I definitely don't have an accounting background. Um, but yeah, I'll start things off. And then we'll try to like make this like somewhat interactive too. So if you have questions, if they're topical to what we're on at the moment, we'll cover those or we'll save them towards the end. Um, but yeah, so the kind of the I guess the underlying like message, if you're going to take something away from this, is that not everything valuable is measurable. So like there's a lot of things that you're forced to measure as a team. And when you're really focused on not providing value, and it's just for the sake of talking about capacity metrics and things like that, it's not really that helpful. And actually, like ended up burning me when I was um, when I was in my previous role. I ended up measuring, trying to come up with a new metric system, and I made the mistake of biting off more than I could chew, and then there's the expectation that you're going to keep producing those metrics, and it can become a nightmare. So I think less is more is a really good theme for anything in CTI work, even in management and metrics and ROI. You really want to focus on the signals that provide value, and we'll cover this later, but optimizing on the wrong metric. There's a certain things that humans do. I'm a human too. I don't know why I said it like that, but certain thing that people do in order to sort of game the system. Like if you give someone like a goal to like go after a certain metric, we're very smart and we're able to basically take shortcuts to get there, but at the cost of everything else. Um, and then also metrics aren't one size fit all. It depends on your organization. It depends on dependencies between teams. You don't want to take metrics that have a lot of cross dependencies so that if you need to get something from another team to figure out if you're doing good, then you're at their mercy all the time. So I like to focus on making metrics at the start like very easy and part of your natural process. But yeah, that's the trap. There's a lot of bad things you can do with metrics. And I threw this one in. I was looking at the SANS has a lot of good materials on metrics. There's even a talk or a blog post. I think we have it in the reference material. But this was pretty interesting. I thought, like we talk about metrics, but how many people, how many teams actually do this? And about half don't. They don't really measure their own effectiveness. And this could be because of the metric on the right, where a lot of organizations have fewer than 4 full-time analysts. I mean, when I started at my last company, I was the first analyst we had. We didn't even build out a CTI program. So you're basically struggling to breathe and trying to tread water, and being asked to do metrics is almost like a full-time job in itself if you get too carried away. So I can definitely see why. I'm somewhat not surprised that a lot of teams don't measure their own effectiveness, but you really need to. Like the other message of this presentation is it's tremendously valuable if you want to mature your team to get more resources. Like that is the why, but the how is what we're going to talk about here. So we got another slide.
Sorry, Dave.
Yeah, you're good.
I uh I realized one quick note, sorry. I forgot to mention, if you have a question, please put it in the Q&A. We'll address them over there. The chat's closed right now, but if you have a question, please put it in the Q&A. We'll try to break in and answer those things. Bad hosting.
All right. Yeah, so I kind of alluded to this before, but there's actually a British economist in 1975 who kind of coined this, there's this law that it's named after this economist called Goodhart's Law. And the paraphrase version of what he found was that when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to become a good measure. So you've probably come across this many times. Maybe your team gets hyper focused on throughput or um, number of detections, number of resolutions for ticketing systems, that type of thing. But speed can be also gamed. So it's usually at the expense of quality. So you want to ensure that you have maybe a counter metric in place. So I think it's good to have like a gold standard. Like you want to be really fast, but if you're really fast and really crappy with how you deal with your work and your detections and how you resolve things, then your team's reputation is going to tank. So it's really the wrong metric. This can be applied in lots of different ways, but human beings were ingenious at or incentivized to like game the system and make our lives easier. But you want to have kind of like this idea of a counter metric where you focus maybe instead of speed, what's the opposite of that to ensure that the worst case scenario doesn't happen, that you're basically burning yourself out, not doing quality work. So you want to maybe reduce false positives, false negatives, that type of stuff when you're talking about detection work. So yeah, I like to kind of think of it this way. And this was one of the biggest ahas for me because I've just seen this so many times in different teams where we just hyper focus on one metric, but having like basically a counterweight to that to ensure quality, I think is a really good thing to do.
Yeah, I think that's a really good message, and it's something that's not talked about enough, I think.
And yeah, along those lines, so one of the things that gets talked about a lot, especially when you review security products, especially it could be EDR, it could be different tooling, but there's this like this like golden this way of looking at coverage, like 100% coverage is the goal. And I really think, oh, there's Sean.
I was trying to hope, I thought that would put you in there. Sorry about that.
No, you're good. How dare you? Um, Yeah, so in MITRE ATT&CK, or it could be any other system, right? It's also easily gamed. So if you get 100% coverage, there's a lot of things that can go wrong with that because you're probably not spending the time you need on the things that matter. So threat modeling, actually looking at what's relevant to your organization, drawing from your own intelligence requirements is the thing that should help you focus on what to spend effort on. Not only that, but not all techniques are equal. So, I mean, you're always told as an intel analyst to kind of move left in the attack chain. But if you go too left into reconnaissance and those types of things where, they're staging activity, there's tons of noise. And there's so much volume and activity there. It's not all relevant. And you can't really derive value from all techniques. So really think about your threat modeling and what you have sensors for. Because if you are doing coverage and you don't actually validate things with what you have, as far as like your logging capabilities, what systems you have, then you can't really test it out and make sure it works. So yeah, myth one, not all techniques are equal. Myth two, 100% is the goal, not really, because you're just going to overwhelm people. And part deux, part two, I learned a French word.
Good for you, Dave.
So we got, yeah, so like I got this watermelon thing. I also used credits go to Google Gemini for some of the artistic expression here, but the watermelon is like everything looks green on the outside. You're like your coverage is great, but underneath is this kind of seedy underbelly of red where you're not actually really covering the things you need to. So that's the analogy there. Probably a poor analogy. Um, but also coverage is not binary. There's a lot of stuff that happens between your initial visibility and logs. But being able to log something doesn't mean that you can alert and detect on it. And even if you can alert and detect on something, doesn't mean that you can respond to it effectively. So what do you mean by coverage? So it's sort of a loaded term. And if you're just relying on a vendor to do it for you, it's probably going to be very superficial and untested at best. And also, oh yeah, one
Oh,
more thing,
sorry.
Sean.
I thought you were done with that one.
Oh
And
yeah, no, I was just yeah, can you go back one?
well, maybe I got a little edit button that keeps popping over the back button. So
You don't have to. The last point, there we go, is that if you rely on MITRE Tech is fantastic, right? We actually our next webinar, we're bringing on a couple MITRE people who are really authoritative. They're a great group. It's a great framework, but it's not 100%. And that's why it has to update every so often. So if you're 100% reliant on coverage as being your metric in MITRE ATT&CK, for example, you're still going to have blind spots. It's like what you don't know, your unknown unknowns. So you always have to think about that. Okay, that's it, Sean. Thanks. Yeah, and so this one is like really, there's 2 points I want to make here. This is a ridiculous rendition of the Intel cycle. Um, Feedback is usually like the thing that's like kind of tucked away on the side, but it's actually really important for metrics because it really helps you prove value of your Intel system. And also, so two things are intelligence requirements, your planning and direction. That's the foundation. It will help you kind of focus your efforts on things that matter. So you're not doing 100% coverage, right? You're kind of focused on the things that actually are against your environment, what threat actors are doing. Um, but the other message here is that I want people to really revisit feedback because you don't have to make it super complicated. And I think the best thing to do is even if you start really small, put a feedback like question, like was this report useful or something like that, or maybe even a thumbs up. It doesn't have to be super complicated, but if your stakeholders can basically work in the systems they work in and they don't have to go to a completely different system to provide feedback, and that feedback is kind of nested in that deliverable in a simple question, that's one of the best things you can do because the other end of it is people telling analysts like, oh, you should always like follow up with your stakeholders, but really it takes a lot of time and commitment to do that, and you only have so much of a social battery after doing all your analyst work. And I think starting with embedded lightweight feedback in maybe a ticketing system or at the bottom of your report is the best thing to do. And then also, there's this idea of measures of performance versus measures of effectiveness. And the performance are performatory. They're vanity metrics in a way. They're somewhat useful because it helps gauge your team's capacity for work, but they're not actually showing how your team provides value to the company. And that's measures of effectiveness. Okay.
so I can take this one. So you've perhaps heard of the first statement here: "What gets measured gets managed." Some people attribute it to Peter Drucker. Apparently, he doesn't own up to that one. The other thing is what gets measured gets done, and then but neither one of those were Peter Drucker's statements. They were basically attributed to somebody named Ridgway who didn't actually say them, but the reporter who wrote about a paper that Ridgway wrote actually put them into the paper. Anyway, the idea here is that if you pick the wrong metric, that's what people will focus on, and that's what will get managed. That's what people try to achieve. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the right metric. I think Dave's comment earlier about picking metrics that kind of counterbalance each other. So if you're talking about speed, then something about quality kind of balances out the two metrics. But we've seen this in all kinds of areas of business. I mean, I'll just say from a marketing perspective, if you measure something that is not you think is an indicator of something that will drive you to the end goal, but it doesn't necessarily move toward the end of goal, then it's not really something you want to measure. So you pick a different measure. Measure what the team controls. A lot of people have advocated for this. I don't know, Andy Grove, who wrote one of the best books on management in his upbringing at Intel, talks about pushing metrics down to the people that can control them and have the decision power over them. So, for instance, saying that security people, cybersecurity people are responsible for revenue. It is really hard for that to be any connection. Yeah, yes, there are things that you can do to reduce the risk of a breach, and that could potentially impact revenue. But there's so many other things that you don't want to make somebody accountable for that metric. So you push it down to the things they are accountable for. Keep the collection cost honest. Dave had talked about this. You saw the earlier slide with Sands, how people measure themselves, and you only have a certain amount of time that you have to do measurement, and you really should be collecting intel and producing intel and sharing intel that's of use for the company. So managing the metrics is not a full-time job. It shouldn't be taking up a person's time. It should be something that you can get managed. So you have to select the right metrics in a way that's kind of
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, Sean, I just want to jump in there too. I think when I was like reading up on metrics and what other people do, I feel like the moment that you have to dedicate time to creating a custom dashboard is you're kind of lost at that point because you want metrics really to fall out of the tools that you already use. Because once you start making custom visualizations and spending time with formatting and stuff, it really can take a lot of time. And if you focus on too many metrics and you're constantly formatting and updating these things, and if it's across teams, it can be a total nightmare. So just be really selective about what you pick.
Yeah, that's good. There's a good question for you, Dave. You can check it out in the Q&A, and I'll get to that in just one second. The fourth point on here is that, kind of the square root of a number doesn't necessarily make it a good number. Precision does not indicate uh, that it's a better metric to do. So measuring it out to three decimal points doesn't make, the number of donuts eaten versus IOCs shared a quality metric. I do kind of like that little graph though. As you eat a few more donuts, your number of IOCs you can share goes up, but then eventually, you eat too many donuts and it has to go down, of course. But it's also a statement of picking the right metrics is really important. The ones that aren't really moving the program forward are the ones that are often easy to measure. It doesn't mean that those are the ones you should focus on. So, Dave, do you see that the question? How can you bridge the gap between the thumbs up feedback and tracing it back to actual business decision in a repeatable, automated way that doesn't take tons of physical time messaging each stakeholder about what they did with the intelligence you
Yeah.
gave them?
Yeah, I think if you have capacity, it would be really nice to interview stakeholders, and you should do that like periodically, like your major stakeholders every so often. It could be annual, it could be every 6 months or something. But it's a kind of a mixed bag. It's really hard to automate if something is truly leading to a business decision. And sometimes what you have to settle for is a proxy metric where you don't get that signal directly. And for the sake of timeliness and efficiency, you have to use sort of like the thumbs up or the brief feedback as some kind of indication that things are going well. If they don't respond, then that could be another signal too. Um, so the other thing is cultural, and we can talk about culture. We have a slide on it. We'll talk about too, and it depends on how well socialized the CTI program is at your company. So,
All right, let's move on. You know what? I had two surveys, but I didn't enter them as surveys, so people can't ask them. So let's just go. Dave, you want to talk about the different kinds of metrics?
yeah. So I mean, you can make a metric on anything. So anything that you can see and observe, but obviously it's not all going to be helpful. So I have a slide on this later too. We'll talk about sort of like different levels of maturity of a team, and with maturity comes like resources and capacity to work on maybe additional metrics. So if you're talking about like risk metrics, let's start at the bottom. Those things like what got prevented, top risks, entire program metrics. Those are things like if you're less mature, you really shouldn't spend a whole lot of time worrying about at that point because you're really trying to build operational capacity and build a system. So if you're in the building stage where maybe you're one or two people, you shouldn't be thinking of packaging things to the board necessarily. What I've been told before is you always try to kind of position your outputs so that you're at least two levels above your direct management. So you're anticipating what they're after. So maybe that's a good target instead. Um, Risk metrics, program metrics are things that I think you worry about more when you're more mature. And that's looking at, your analyst retention, training hours per analyst, that type of stuff. That's not going to help you day to day. So at the other end of things, activity metrics, IOCs ingested, reports published, those are actually still important. I kind of, you know, told you not to use those at first, but if you're just starting out and you're trying to figure out your cadence, your operational cadence, and how much work people are able to handle, those are still valuable. And actually, what's a good metric is taking those activity and coverage ones and relating it to impact metrics and making sort of a ratio so that you do have sort of that counterbalance metric, a set of metrics that I mentioned before. Definitely if you're starting off sort of at the beginning of this and then moving down, and the farther down you go is more aspirational. But at the end of the day, you got to realize if you are talking to high level management, they don't care about threat actors. They don't care about malware. They care about how much money you're saving them potentially. And so Sean, I think, is going to have some really good messages on that. I don't know if we'll get into that yet, though. But
All right, that's good. Thanks. Yeah, I'll let you continue on. I think you're referring to some of the ROI stuff, and we'll definitely cover that.
yeah, yeah, ROI. So traditional vanity metrics is just complete throughput. How many things did I do? How many plates did I spin? How many gears did I turn? It's just volume, really. So, I mean, these shouldn't be surprising to people. And unfortunately, a lot of people really just focus on these. So we can,
But like you said, Dave, it's good to establish some baselines, understand how your team performs, what a normal amount of throughput is, but it's not necessarily a measure of how well the team or how effective the CTI program is.
yep, yep. But I mean, they're still helpful initially. So
Helpful
that's the
initially.
other message too. But
Yeah.
all right. And the outcome ones, and it really is pretty variable and it depends on your organization, but it's really, how many decisions or actions were driven by a report. Sometimes you can't get that directly, especially if you have really new relationships with your stakeholders. You sort of have to use that proxy of like the thumbs up as like bare minimum feedback, but something is better than nothing. If they're not reacting to it at all, they never give feedback, they never seek you out, That's another good metric is like once you build a team good enough and your leadership, your senior leaders actually like proactively ask you for things. That is another really good metric that you should think of because that means that and basically it's a trust game. You're building trust, and as long as you're focused on the right things, your PIR, your intelligence requirements driven, and you're adding value every time you present your stuff, they're going to seek you out. And so that's a really good outcome focused metric. And it's really kind of murky when you get up there and like measuring decisions and that type of stuff. Sometimes it gets really gray and it's really hard to automate that. So that was a really good point from the question before. I mean, it is really hard to automate. Like, how do you measure trust? And in some ways you can't, but maybe the number of times that they seek you out and ask for an RFI, number of RFIs are actually could be a good metric as well.
Yeah,
Um,
especially the trend in that ask, right? If the trend's going up, they're asking for more stuff, then they must be getting value out of what you're providing.
Exactly. Yeah. And you build that, you layer it on very carefully, you focus on quality work, and you anticipate, you write good products, and you've always focused on value. So it's that quality metric and not speed is really good. And it's funny because I put this in LinkedIn when I was kind of sort of like advertising this webinar, but I did have my CISO come up to me one day, just randomly bump into me. He's like, "Oh, how's security going?" I said, "Oh, we're doing great. I'm going to share this report with you. We found, these different lines of business are more likely to be affected by blah 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 threat actor." He's like, "Okay, but how many blocks are you doing?" So like he was all about number of like blocks, and like that's a different type of action. So he's more kind of steeped in like traditional security, like you shouldn't just be like reading reports and writing reports and things like that. You should be actually tracking blocks and things that you actively prevent. So those are good things too, like blocks in the firewall, even though some people, associate that with sort of low-hanging fruit. It's just activity based. It's still somewhat of an outcome. You're still blocking things.
Yeah.
So I guess the shift is like between just like producing things versus actually like measuring defensive actions.
Hey Dave, we've got a hand raised, so I'm gonna go ahead and see if I can get that hand raised to if I can open them up. So we're trying something new. We already had a couple of snafus on this webinar, so why not just allow Derek? Derek, you had a question. Derek, you look like you're muted.
You could type it in too if your microphone doesn't work or you don't want
Yeah, if
to.
something's not working, Derek, let's just try entering that into the Q&A and we'll try to address it. Thank you. All right, so let's go back to the slides. Oh, I've got another question.
It should be
Oh,
more about
turn.
telling the story. Threat intel identifies X and the actions taken, or the monitoring was enhanced, or the tools modified in a way I or reduced the threat. Yeah, definitely. It's about crafting a story. So, yeah, because of this thing that threat intel did, it led to this. And a perfect example maybe is like something you take for granted. If you have a SIM where you have some kind of CTI enrichment enabled, and you're able to get the SOC to actually like, sorry, I was looking at the Q&A. You get them to actually like turn things around faster because of CTI. Like how many enriched alerts drove down response times and resolution, I mean. So like things like that. But yeah, that's great. It's like it is like once you get into management and you're like looking at the team in general, it's like it's more of like how do you share our story? And it's because of this we led to this. So that's a good framing.
All right, great.
All right, and this one is measures of performance versus measures of outcome. It's just another way to kind of illustrate. There's so many ways to measure performance, but really like as part of like that story. It's saying like our intel led to this action and before an attack happened potentially, right? So maybe CTI is proactive enough. They get wind of a ransomware campaign that hit something in your sector. Now you identify how they did that breach potentially. You can narrow it down maybe to some vulnerabilities that they're likely to exploit based on their past behavior. And then you can nominate specific systems for escalated patching. So like that's the story part. And so that's exactly true. It's measures of efficiency. And that's a totally different story than, I wrote a report on this new threat that's likely to happen. Well, what do you do with that? Like, what was the outcome? So like think of a normal threat intel report and you have a recommendation section. It's doing the recommendations and tying it to your story.
All right, Dave, we're at 40 minutes after. Just
All right, you want me to shut up? Okay.
I want you to use the time appropriately.
All right. Yeah. So this one, yeah, it's nice to say like these things, and it really depends on how receptive and how well socialized your CTI program is at your company. So if you're brand new, start with small wins. Find meet with people. It's really like if you're a small group, but if you have any capacity to like meet people, figure out how the business makes money, talk to people who should be affected by CTI, like the risk office or something like that. Just like see if you can find some champions that can help socialize CTI and get them as stakeholders, and then ask them for feedback too. So it really like starts small, kind of it's kind of using human in a way to, you gather sources in your company. This is my FBI background coming out, but like you kind of figure out who can be recruited to be like a source at your company, and then you work with them and you develop the relationship, and then hopefully from that you can expand. So that's my advice if you're kind of starting small. Um, Obviously, if you're more established, it just making sure that you translate things into risk language for people.
Oh, I went to a double click.
That's good. You gave away that meme a little bit. Yeah, so approaches to adopt outcome metrics. I think maybe you put this together. I don't remember. Um, yeah, just following up after reports, having that cooperative workflow partner. So like partner up with that stakeholder I just mentioned to get their feedback instead of like canvassing using an email to blast it out to like all of your stakeholders. Choose one who you have a good relationship with. Um, and compile outputs review with your stakeholder group. So if you have capacity and you have like a bunch of stakeholders, maybe you can organize like a periodic review of all the things that your program did to meet their needs. So that's a good thing to do too. And I mentioned this a little bit before, but sometimes you have plan A and then you have to follow, you have to go to plan B. Um, so, it could be, it's really hard to measure feedback, right? Hey, John Powers. I knew it was going to be him. Okay. Report referenced if something cited in a risk register or talked about in the board meeting. If they go and seek you out, that's a great proxy signal too. And sometimes those are more powerful. Um, Forwarding a report to another team, and something really, hard to measure is like, is your stuff used in awareness training? And actually, I was lucky enough at my last company is that they liked the CTI team enough where we actually helped develop modules for the awareness training, especially for like phishing and that type of stuff. So, yeah.
Well,
So,
Dave,
I don't
oh,
know. Do you want to take John's question? I don't know if he
oh,
had.
I didn't see the question.
I think he had his hand raised.
Oh, well, sorry.
I'm really curious what he's going to say.
Uh, yeah, I'm having a tough time
That's
getting to
okay.
the
It's okay.
screen.
Oh, he
Oh,
fat fingered it. He got excited.
yeah. All
Okay.
right. But by the way, one of the resources we're going to put out there is a thing that John wrote for on the Sands article. That's a really good one. So we'll definitely share that link about metrics, MEH tricks, which is a really
Oh,
good
that's a
article.
different John, Sean. But yeah,
Oh, that's a different John. So, oh,
yeah.
John. Oh,
There's a lot of
sorry.
Johns. Yeah, you're good.
Yeah, yeah. All right, my bad. Um,
Yeah, is this you now?
what's that?
The three dimensions of CTI value?
Yeah. So, we've talked a little bit about this, but each one goes a little bit further away from the team and thinks broader across the organization. So, the operational value, the things that you're doing within your team, how fast are you, how efficient you are, what's the productivity, those kind of things. The nice thing about those is a lot of times they're something you can quantitatively calculate. So if you do see some speed gains from a tool, from a different technique, from a different workflow, a lot of times those can be something that you report back up. Strategic value is more about what ties back into the results of the decisions that are being made. So are you providing good intel that's leading to better decisions? And then risk reduction value. This is one that's a little bit obscure. It's sometimes when I talk about ROI, it's something that fits into the category of often overstated, sometimes miscalculated, sometimes you know used as the justification for something that maybe probably was a little too egregious in the use. Let's go to let me skip ahead. John, or Dave, do you want to talk about this one, maturity roadmap?
Yeah, this is definitely not a Dave original drawing, but um, so it goes like with what I mentioned before, is that you don't want to do all metrics for all measures of maturity. For tier one, which is like you're maybe one person or you're doing it part-time at CTI. Maybe you've got other security functions that you support, vulnerability management, whatever. You're really just trying to get your head above water, establishing a baseline. So the story is more about capacity and repeatability and making sure that you have enough initial resources to do the job if you need to. So RFI volume is a good one. That's a good, still an outcome focused metric. Turnaround time, but obviously like counter that with some kind of quality test as well. PIR coverage. If you're establishing a baseline and you're solo and you have PIRs, good on you. That's great. So even like just formulating PIRs and making sure what you do maps to them is super important. And then also basic consumer feedback, basic customer feedback. That thumbs up could be helpful than nothing at all, or just a quick like, was this report helpful? And leave it as a blank field for them to fill out. Um, as you get a little bit further on, you can start thinking about mean time to detect, TTP coverage, but in a smart way, not just focusing on 100% no matter what, but actually like really focus coverage on things that you have signals for. And actually, MITRE Ingenuity, um, or I forget what group it is, but there's like basically a signals matrix that they have on their site. So if you search for MITRE, and I think it's called, you can try to look for it quick. I can't find it. It's sensor mappings. It's a sensor mappings project that they did. So there's like a spreadsheet, and it actually tells you what systems you can use to track different types of things in MITRE ATT&CK. Even like mapping to sensor coverage is a really good thing to try. Yeah, so then when you get above that, that's when you go into more risk reduction metrics and program metrics and things like that. But you should definitely not focus on that in the beginning when you're tier one and tier two. That's more for later maturity because it just takes a lot of time. Using FAIR individually as a solo analyst or a group of two, it's like this is going to be your full-time job, but it's super helpful.
We kind of talked about some of these, Dave, how to get started. Did you want to say anything else here or?
Yeah, I think as far as main points are, just have that counterbalance metric. Really like kind of pick and choose what metrics you want. Start small, get a stakeholder on your team, and use them for kind of like the untested pilot of what your feedback could look. And that's really how you can build a good system to scale.
Yeah, I'm gonna just I put this chart up because I think it does talk to a little bit of that. So, there are things that are easy to collect, and are hard to collect, and there's strategic value. Is it low or high? And it's almost like, you might start with some of the avoid category if you're just building out your team or trying to get a baseline for performance. Um, you'll see some of that in the vanity traps, a little bit harder to collect, a little bit, but it's almost like you're doing a counterclockwise circle starting in the lower left, and you're trying to go to vanity traps to start here to move. You really want more of those start here and then move to the left, the things that are higher value if you can. All right. All right, we're going to talk about ROI for just a minute. And the reason that we brought up ROI is a lot of, vendors will provide, what they believe the ROI is of their tool. A lot of you will use ROI to calculate the value of a purchase or something. Um, there's reasons when to do it and when not to do it. It's best when you have it discrete, bounded investments. So you know how much time you can measure the outputs. Things like a transaction are pretty clear. You know how much it costs. You can estimate benefits to some degree. Um, the question is, how many of those benefits should you include in the calculation, and how many of them are kind of outside of it? So when you start to get into everything's really probabilistic, or you're estimating the absence of an event that may or may not happen, then all of a sudden, it starts to get less credible, and that definitely matters when you're trying to get approval to get a purchase. So if you look at three scenarios here, which one is better? The first one has benefits that are worth 150. The second one has benefits that are worth 150. The third one has benefits that are worth 1500, so 10x. The costs are, all 125, 125, and then 10x. So the ROIs are the same, and it really depends, So in one sense, you might say, well, on project A, the direct costs, the indirect costs, they're higher. The benefits are higher, so we know what the investment is, we know what the output is. We're not reliant on these indirect ones that maybe are a little bit fuzzier. Um, the second one, Project B, you might say, yeah, the good thing is it costs us less on the output, $75, but there's a lot of impact on the team. So the indirect costs might be felt in, the implementation costs of it on other people in the project. And, then you have to secure those resources. You have to use their time, and that is another cost that adds into the project. So, evaluating a project just based on ROI can produce misleading events. The third one costs 10 times as much, and so it's a bigger risk. And then you start to ask, well, what would I do with the capital that I invested in that project versus I could have invested in something completely different? And so, each one of these has an ROI, but every one of them feels a little bit different based on how you're building it out. So let me talk a little bit about some of the different things to measure. So kind of like that last chart, if you're looking at operational, these are real measurable things. They happen. Um, they're not dependent on some event like somebody attacking you. You measure them in terms of things like labor savings, tool consolidation, headcount avoidance, things that are more concrete. And they really fit into the mindset of somebody who's in finance or procurement that is thinking about, how does this impact our business from a numbers perspective? So, yeah, they're good to include in ROI, and the more of them you can include, the better. Strategic start to get they're real. They're real. So if you're saving time on decisions that you're making, that's great, but it's not easily calculated, and it's really hard for people to get their head around. So what's important when you're building out these metrics is that you are including them. If you do include them, that you include them, but you're very careful on how you measure them. You might include a range. You might say that this is the probability that these things will happen. And so, or a confidence level. So you're giving some wiggle room there that makes it clearer that they're a little bit fuzzier and it requires a little bit of adjustment probably, or that somebody could also think about it in terms of a variable that they want to adjust in the model. Risk reduction gets even further away from the original benefit, so harder to harder to, you're contingent based on something not happening. That's kind of hard. So better way to think about a risk rather than, loss avoidance is exposure reduction. So perhaps that this risk has an exposure of a certain amount. And if a new tool can help reduce that exposure, then you can think about that delta as something that is truly a benefit. And then you can think about how confident are you that you are achieving that delta or you're providing some sort of risk reduction. And so again, you're really clear that these things are not direct benefits or direct costs, but you're also giving them that this is also an external benefit or this is a benefit of this project that will that we do believe in. It's just a little fuzzier, a little harder. So probably don't include it. What you might do is include a parallel view of the thing. So here's the costs and the benefits and the ROI calculated without this, and then here's if we add in this additional amount. Now, people might discount that immediately. Finance people definitely will, but it's still it's a good metric to think of. What are the halo effects of this project? Um, so So when you're thinking about that numerator, you want as many of those direct costs as possible. You know, you also want like, cost avoidance is truly a benefit. You want to be clear on the kinds of hourly savings that you have, so you want to include, overhead rates, you want to include a delay in a headcount needed is actually cost is cash, right? Time savings of a person is slack recovery, right? So they can do something else with that time. So there are different ways of thinking about these hours, and it's really important to be clear what the measure represents when you're talking to your finance team. Same thing with the cost side. You're going to have licensing costs. You might have incremental headcount, or an impact on another team. So if it requires a security architect to go create an implementation or an integration with another tool or to implement this thing, then that's a cost that should be included in the direct cost of it. Um, there's other things like indirect costs, so like if you introduce more noise or more workflow friction, you require some new training. Those are also costs and they should be factored in as well. The things that cause some credibility to drop are, ignoring the indirect costs, the cost of that integration, double counting some of the benefits, thinking of it in terms of time saved, but then also speed to decision. Sometimes those things might overlap. All right, so a quick example. So, you think about analyst time. Say you're spending $60,000 a year on a threat intel tool. It could be any tool. It doesn't have to be threat intel. It's not a Feedly tool. I'm just saying this is just a general example. So the first thing is thinking about how much time are you saving. So, you're saving a certain amount of time across a number of analysts that are on your team. You multiply that times some sort of labor rate, and you get to some dollar amount. Tool consolidation, maybe you don't need some other fee that you're paying for because of this new tool, and therefore you're saving some actual cash. Faster triage starts to get a little bit fuzzier, and then you end up with a total benefit, and then you compare that to your total cost, and you come up with an ROI. Pretty simple tool. The thing that gets questioned a lot is the labor savings. This is one of the things that gets inflated a lot in tool purchases. So, what hours do you want? I've seen some ROI studies by vendors that are just not realistic. They're assuming that person is working, over 2,000 hours. That means they're not taking vacation. They're not. They have no meetings. They're not doing any professional development. All that kind of stuff. So you really should think about what are the contracted hours? How many hours does that team actually spend doing threat intelligence work? when the tool is built on saving threat intelligence time. And then apply a realistic burden rate. So if you've got people in the US, it's, maybe 1.3 is about right. If you got people in Europe, it's probably about 1.5. So you're saying, how much does it cost to pay for all the taxes that you pay as an employer and, some of the health insurance and the other things that you pay for. That's all part of that burden. And then again, be upfront about what kind of savings you have. All right. So before I do this, one thing I wanted to show you is I created a tool. I'll share the tool. Uh, Let me see if I can share this. I have to reshare. Hang on 1 second. Uh, but I'll give you this tool. It's not a Feedly tool. It is a general ROI tool. Um, but it's downloadable. If you go out to the link that Gabby will share, it's going to be read only, but you can save it and open it in your own. You can save it in Excel or do whatever. Anyway, this tool has some descriptions on how to use it. So the first thing you'll do is go to the Input tab, and then here you can enter your different kinds of your team and your labor. How big's your team? What's their salary? What's the overhead? How many days are they working after PTO? What is the hours saved per hour? So you have some of this, and then this productive recovery hour, which is really referring to, how much of that time is actually spent doing threat intelligence work. And, if you reallocate that time to something else, given switching costs and Slack and everything else, how much of that time can you really recover? This is trying to get to a more conservative, more realistic aspect. And then, the costs include licensing, implementation, the effort that you have, if there's going to be price increases every year that you have to think about. And how long does it take you to get productive, so you can ramp that up. Maybe you think you can get productive in a couple of months and you're 100% productive, but that'll vary. So those are kind of direct benefits, but it also has the ability to enter some, different base case. You can enter high or low. You can enter confidence levels. If you think you might be able to delay a head count, that's great. If it's going to save you a certain amount of money, but you can enter confidence. So similar thing with indirect benefits, different ways to estimate the value of um, different benefits, indirect benefits. And then the risk avoidance is treated as a separate thing. So if I go to the calculations, you'll see how the calculations show up. This is built on a 3-year model. So if you have licensing every year, that licensing shows up in different years. And then finally, the risk adjusted ROI, which includes that, would have, kind of a separate section. So you can get to the summary metrics of your ROI, both here in the calculation as well as in the ROI summary, with and without that risk adjusted view where you're looking at all the risk avoidance stuff. So check it out. It's a pretty good tool. You can use it for any kind of purchase. It wouldn't, or even a little bit of a program value, but I would just say program value is a little bit less of a thing that you might want to use ROI for. So, all right, guys, I appreciate you hanging on for an extra 3 minutes. Dave, thanks for all your insights. We're going to share everything, the recording, the tool, a couple of links to resources that we found interesting when we were doing our research. And we will share that all out in an email that gets sent tomorrow morning. So with that said, thank you so much. Please check out the link to the MITRE attack. It's not going to be Dave or I talking, or really anybody from Feedly. It's going to be 2 people from MITRE who know this stuff like the back of their hands because they helped build it. So looking forward to that. That's next Wednesday. All right. Thanks, everyone.